My bad. I'm back. All right. We're going to get started here. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? It is Nate with Terra Fate. Thank you for joining us on our second ever Terra Talk. We are going to have something special tonight. Because it is National Pollinators Week, we are going to be talking about pollinators as well as answering your gardening and plant questions in general. If you got a question about your terrarium plant, ask it. You got some pests, I'll help you fight it. Let's get started. I don't care, make a cameo. Look at this dog right here. Look at that thing. Yeah, he is not perfect.
He is perfect.
He's something. He looks miserable.
He's wet.
Yeah.
Stop it.
So the first question is, what do pollinators do for the environment? So that is like a loaded question. That's pretty much, pollinators do an absolute ton for the environment. Like, that's the most loaded question there is. I mean, everything, if you can name it, pollinators pretty much do it. They help to balance the ecology of the environment. That's one of the largest things that they do. They do that by focusing on specific species in which they pollinate. They're, especially for caterpillars and moths, those host plants are really big for them. So the survival of some of those plants is pretty much mandatory. Everyone's just full of opinions tonight, like they're so perfect. All right, well, we'll give you a Pippi and see. But pollinators play an absolutely massive role, and we'll kind of get into some of that as we go throughout the night. As I'm potting up zinnias, this is what they look like, by the way, or this is what they're gonna look like. It's 8 different colors, right? 2, 4, 6, yeah, 8 different colors. They're all different shades of like yellows and pinks and purples and stuff, which are going to be really good for pollinators as they head back south. Sounds like it's getting rainier. If it gets even rainier, let me know and I'll speak up a little bit more. But, you know, Kurt tail into that, you know, like, what do pollinators do for the environment? Well, one of the first things we have to figure out is what exactly is a pollinator. Well, most of us know that a pollinator is an insect, a mammal. I mean, it can even be a, you know, a reptile. There's actually small geckos that feed on hibiscus plants in the tropics, and they actually pollinate those larger plants from going flower to flower, drinking their nectar. But in general, pollinators are just what they are. They are a being that pollinates flowers. Most of them aren't doing it intentionally. It's not like, you know, the bees wake up in the morning and go, boy, gotta spread my this pollen around to different flowers. They're doing it for the nectar. When it comes to like what types of pollinators there are, it's you know, there's a lot more than what you would think. I've already spoken about small gecko species that manage to pollinate. You have your commons like your bees, your butterflies, and your birds, but you also have bats and moths. Bats are a very large pollinator, especially here in the southern United States, the southwestern United States, where you see a lot of cactuses. There's not a lot of butterflies, so you get bats that pollinate all of those systems. You know, you also have beetles. Beetles don't play a massive role. Your top 3 pollinators are bees, flies, and then birds. Those are your top 3. You'd think that it was butterflies, but butterflies themselves aren't actually like really dominant pollinators like a lot of these other animals are. Yes, they do go from flower to flower, but their bodies, though hairy, aren't like a lot of your bumblebees that you see the pollen sacs just caked up on their legs. And especially like during the summer, you'll actually see hummingbirds that have pollen caked right up above where their noses are, because they're pollinating so many flowers. So it's actually quite a unique thing. You know, everyone, as always, you know, we need to create pollinator gardens for the butterflies. Well, you know, butterflies are great and all that, but they're not always the top pollinator. You know, people love butterflies because they're colorful. You know, you get to see them during the day, but when it really comes down to it, butterflies are only number 4 when it comes to pollinators. If at any point in time anyone has any questions, by all means, you're more than welcome just to kind of like butt in and ask a question. Like, I don't mind. You know, it's pretty easy going. I'm not like super strict on any type of schedule, but any point in time you're like, hey, I got mealybugs eating my plants, what do I do? I'll be like, okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. But if you guys are enjoying what I'm talking about, then I'll just continue to talk about it. Let me just grab some. Oh, I almost ate it. Grab some more zinnias real quick. Everyone happy tomorrow's gonna be Friday? I know I am. I know I am. Everyone out here sounding like Rebecca Black, singing that Friday song. I think I've dated myself because I don't know if a lot of people know about that song. But they might. Who knows? Who knows? But, you know, the one main thing, I'm like sinking in a hole. We laid a bunch of new gravel yesterday. I think we moved almost 4 tons of gravel yesterday. And it's all fresh, so like where I'm sitting, like if you see the camera's crooked and then all of a sudden I straighten out with the camera, it's because I'm actually leaning myself. So I'm gonna try to like right myself as much as I can. But you know, like everyone's like, I want to create a pollinator garden. I want to create a pollinator garden. Like, what do I do to do that? You know, and it's easy, but it's not really that easy, I guess. There's some thought that goes behind it, but in all reality, it's literally just going, hey, that flower, it's like, oh, that flower's really pretty. I'm going to put that in the ground. It's going to help the pollinators. Well, kind of. I put a post out there on Instagram and Facebook about the butterfly bush. That's a perfect example. I'm not going to go too long into it because I do know that people like the butterfly bush. They, you know, there's that hill that some people are willing to die on. So I'm not going to get too preachy about it. Like I put the soapbox away and it didn't come out because it's not waterproof. But butterfly bush is a perfect example because it is literally in the name, butterfly bush. You know, it produces a ton of nectar. You know, it's considered junk food nectar because with what scientific studies have been done about the nectar quality, it hasn't really been the greatest, but it's nectar. I guess that's the view that people have on it, and it's kind of frustrating. Because yes, you have all of these like pollinators coming to this flower. I mean, they're swarming this flower, and it's a long bloom period on the butterfly bush. But the problem is that nectar is kind of like crack. You know, it's like a kid's first taste of chocolate. Oh my God, I want chocolate. I want chocolate. Gimme, gimme, gimme. I want more chocolate. Well, that's not really good because you have to have like actual substance. And what happens is all the pollinators become so fixated on the butterfly bush that they kind of don't pollinate or don't really focus on a lot of the native plants that are flowering along those periods of times also. So you get a lot of native plant like dieback. There's not a lot of great pollination rates or germination rates if any of the flowers do get pollinated. So it's just kind of a cascading effect of, you know, yes, it produces nectar, but that is a good short-term solution. Like, just to one person's problem of wanting to see more butterflies or pollinators, because yes, you'll get pollinators, but you may only get a lot of pollinators for that one season because you're not providing actual habitat or plants for them later on in the future. You know, one great thing to have instead of a butterfly bush would be an oak leaf hydrangea or a flame azalea. You know, that's a very popular plant. It's a native plant. It tolerates our conditions. It has a long bloom time from early spring all the way up until about this time now. Actually, there's hydrangeas that are still blooming, just due to the fact that it's not so astronomically hot. You know, we're still getting some of those cooler periods of time. But the one nice thing about the oak leaf hydrangea is a host plant. So you're not only producing a plant that has nectar, but you're also growing a plant that the butterflies can lay their eggs on, and you can sustain a caterpillar population as well. So you actually get a return on your pollinators. You know, that's what you really want to kind of focus on with all of this. You know, if you want to attract monarchs, everyone knows that monarchs feed on milkweed. Well, there's a lot of different native species for the East Coast where you can plant the milkweed, grow it up as it begins to bloom, which is, you know, coming into peak. Well, I shouldn't even say peak. It's just starting to happen now, and it will actually peak in July. That is when all the monarchs are going to come in. Other pollinators are going to come in. Milkweed beetles are going to come in and pollinate those flowers. The monarchs are going to stay on the plants, lay their eggs, and then you have milkweed caterpillars for the next generation. You know, and there's a lot of examples when it comes to host plants that are fantastic pollinators. Some other really good sources of nectar for, you know, early spring into the middle of summer is blazing star liatris. They call it purple gay feather. It's a very tall spiked plant. That is a native plant. It tolerates some more marshy kind of wet conditions, but it will take regular garden conditions with decent watering. But that's a bulb plant that will slowly divide over time, and you'll be able to attract those pollinators into it. Now, granted, there's not a lot of pollinators that, you know, use liatris as a host plant, but that is a plant that I call a bat signal. It's a very tall flower spike. It's very aromatic, and it produces an absolute pile of nectar. It's a purple color, so it has those UV hues to attract various different pollinators to the garden. And once they're there, that's where you have your other your pollination plants, your pollinator-friendly plants, such as Coreopsis, which is a host plant to, I think, like 18 or 20 different butterflies and moths. It's a super durable plant, deer resistant. The deer will eat the flowers, but they don't really eat the leaves too much. And even if the deer do get into it, it's such a versatile and hardy plant. The Radiana tigrina is one of the ones that I posted online. You know, another one is goldenrod. Everyone's like, oh, I get hay fever from goldenrod. You don't get hay fever from goldenrod. You get it, well, from the different grasses and things of that nature. You know, but goldenrod, that's another amazing pollination plus host plant, and there are several species of goldenrod that aren't as invasive, or I guess aggressive, because the native plant really can't be invasive. Well, it can be, but I'm not getting into that. It can be very aggressive, like a mint or a bee balm. You know, it'll take over an area relatively quickly because it doesn't really need a stratification on its seeds. But there are different species like sweet goldenrod where you can actually use the flower heads as a dye for shirts or yarn, or, you know, whatever you want, dyeing paper. But you can also use the leaves as a tea. And sweet goldenrod, New Jersey tea, bergamot and a few other ones were actually all ingredients in a tea called the Patriot Tea, which was what the new colonists drank, or the Americans drank after after like the war with England and the Boston Tea Party Revolution. They took these different plants. They didn't really know what they were. Sweet fern is another one, and if you kind of are catching the trend here, sweet. So sweet flag, sweet fern. There's several, sweet goldenrod. There's several other different ones, but they were labeled sweet because it helped people to know that they were safe to drink, and a lot of them were in teas. Yeah, multiple use plants. That's like versatile use plants. That's definitely a term that describes a lot of natives. You know, there's multiple uses for that plant, and it doesn't even mean that, you know, it's a plant that is only good for like just this situation or that situation. It's good for several different situations, which is fantastic. Another really good one is Joe Pye weed. It's a beautiful flower. It gets relatively tall, so especially if you have like kind of like a fence, or you know, the backside of a shed or something that you're trying to cover up, it gets about 5, sometimes 6 feet tall. Big big pinkish kind of purple hue flowers to it, and it just is a fantastic pollinator plant. And those examples right there cover, granted that's a small pollinator garden, but it covers from early spring flowering all the way into winter, to when, you know, they migrate out and go towards. Goldenrod's a continuous bloomer, and it'll keep going all the way into late fall. You know, some like poor examples, you know, of like kind of not recommended, you know, butterfly bush, one we've already talked about. Plants that have double blooms, and like double blooms is they have stacking layers on the petals that make it very difficult for pollinators to be able to get down into the stamen and get the nectar and all of that. So like, granted, a double bloom looks beautiful, but it's absolutely terrible. And you see, so a lot of your double blooms are going to come from like cultivars of various species. You're like, well, you know, they have I'm trying to think of one. There's a purple Culver's root, which is called Cupid's Love or something like that. That is a cultivar of regular Culver's root that has a white flower. The purple Culver's root is a sterile cultivar that does not produce anything beneficial for the rest of the environment. So getting a plant like that, you know, while it looks fantastic, it doesn't really benefit, you know, your overall picture of what you're trying to look for. Cultivars that are considered, or excuse me, I should say, are variants and not cultivars, is something like the Coreopsis. You know, if you get a Coreopsis lancifolia, which is lanceleaf Coreopsis, but you get Coreopsis lancifolia var, or variety alba, which means that it produces a white flower or it's got white throughout its leaves, that is just a natural occurring variety of that plant, and it still makes it useful for pollinators in your garden. So if you're out there looking for plants, try not to get anything double bloomed. Try not to get any cultivars. Typically, like if you're at a big box store, anything that's copyrighted or trademarked is typically like a no-go for an actual true pollinator garden. So that's always one thing to look at. Obviously, invasive species, like, you know, at this point, like like I said, I'm not going to get too preachy about it. Butterfly bush is an invasive species. Barberry is an invasive species. Granted, it's deer resistant. It's fantastic, but there's a lot of you know, pollinator and host friendly native species such as Monarda or bee balm, which are deer resistant, and they actually benefit not only butterflies and bees but also hummingbirds. So there's a lot of examples there when it comes. And if anyone ever is trying to set up a garden, then you're more than welcome to like shoot a picture of it and be like, hey, is this like something that I can put in my pollinator friendly garden? Will this help? And I'm not gonna get into you know, like really designing a garden or anything like that. I'm gonna talk about a few tips, excuse me, and tricks. But you know, if you really want to learn about if you really want to learn about that stuff, we can certainly kind of do like a more visual class and like kind of design a garden later on. But this is just kind of short. It's a quick, sweet talk. But it's something that we could certainly explore later on in the future. But like overall, like it's and you know, there's, you know, again, I'm not trying to preach any of this. Like, I just hope that everyone is here under the understanding that I'm just trying to share some information for anyone who might be interested. But when so yeah, Megan, with your comment, been a little confused as to what plants we should try to introduce to make our yard more pollinator friendly. Yeah, it's the problem. The problem with it is you know, in some areas that have kind of been doing this a little long, like, I shouldn't really say areas. Well, yeah, there's a lot of places in this country that have established native plant nurseries. You know, they have all of this stuff to where, you know, you're not forced to go to a nursery that sells like petunias and peonies and all that kind of stuff. You know, that stuff is good, but you know, there's not really a lot of good native options locally, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to provide those, you know, for the future. We're working on like shrubs and trees, not to mention like herbaceous perennials, so that, you know, people have an opportunity to not be as stressed out, like, oh, I'm trying to do something good for the environment, but I am either forced to go to like a big box store, or I'm forced to go to someone whose practices I don't really align myself with. And like one perfect example, I've linked in the link button here. I don't know if I can show anyone, but the Xerces Society, it's a fantastic society. They did a study on milkweed, and what the society did is they actually went to 35 different stores around the area. You know, they traveled all over, and they bought 5 milkweed each from each store. It was in some cases, unfortunately, it was similar species of milkweed in all 5 cases, or there was like Asclepias incarnata, which is your typical swamp milkweed that you see everyone have, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it was actually the tropical milkweed, which looks fantastic. It kind of looks like Asclepias tuberosa, which is our natural butterfly weed. That quick cool thing. Anything that is named, that has the name weed in it, it is because when colonists were first over here and they were attempting to like cultivate the land, those species typically have like a really high germination rate, and as soon as there's disturbance in the soil, they usually pop up relatively quick. So when you see things that have like weed in it, like nowadays we've been taught, oh my god, weed, it's horrible, it's terrible. And that's why the colonists named that, because it was literally a weed. As soon as they would cultivate ground, it would just start to grow, so it was frustrating for them to have to keep pulling it. But they're not actually weeds. Some of them are a little more aggressive than others, but most of the ones that are aggressive don't have the name weed in it. But yeah, a little sidebar. Where was I? Oh yeah. Tropical milkweed is absolutely terrible, but what the Xerces Society study found when they surveyed all these plants is they were what they were trying to figure out was why are we buying these milkweed plants? Why are we setting them out in the yard? The butterflies are coming to them. They're feeding off the nectar. They're laying eggs on the milkweed, but as the caterpillars grow and feed off of the plants, they die. They either die early stage or they die while in the cocoon and they never actually crystallize. And what they found out is that out of all of these milkweed that they studied and tested, that every single one of them had at least 5 different chemicals and fungicides still remnant in the leaves, which was getting passed on. Now, some of them were very minute trace amounts that may not affect, a small caterpillar eating the leaves, but other ones were like in super high concentrations, and a lot of them are USDA organic regulated herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides that larger nurseries, and not even larger nurseries, but smaller nurseries that may not really understand what's going on, or understanding what's in their mixtures, are using to help combat things. And that's one of the really difficult things. Cindy, I remember the question you asked last week is, I'm getting aphids on my plants, in a big nursery, if you get aphids on a lot of plants at once, that could spell a lot of loss. So they would just hit it quick, but what they weren't realizing is those plants were absorbing that, and it wasn't really diluting out. It wasn't as safe as everyone thinks. So it makes it a lot more difficult when you try to go out and look for a plant, because you're like, oh yeah, this is USDA organic, this plant's definitely been grown on a satin pillow and is really safe for whatever eats it. Well, that's not always the case, because USDA organic has a lot of chemicals in it that have residual effects over time. But I found that as a really interesting study, because it just goes to show you really need to find a good supplier, a good trusted supplier. Don't be afraid to ask questions when you go to these places to purchase plants. Be like, hey, what are you spraying on your flowers? Do you know what your supplier has been spraying on these plants? Especially if you're going to get host plants for butterflies and moths and beetles or whatever, because those are things that you're really going to want to pay attention to. So it's, as long as you take your time and you do your research, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. Thankfully, you got us, so you can always ask us what we've got here at the nursery, and we can try to help you out. So far, our whole thing is we are going to try to stay herbicide, fungicide, and pesticide free 100%. It is a freaking nightmare as of right now, but we are working on creating a better IPM, or integrated pest management system, to where we're able to kind of counteract, we have an aphid burst over on this section of milkweed. How do we counteract that? And a lot of the ways we counteract that is actually through flower pots. We pot up marigolds and nasturtiums and all of these other plants that hoverflies and predatory wasps are attracted to, and we put them around and we keep them close to the plants that we're trying to grow for our customers and clients. And what we found is that it actually does help, and it's unfortunate because the rebound in the reproduction system of an aphid. And another cool sidebar, so when you see one aphid, you're actually seeing 3 aphids, because the aphid, there's 2 stages of eggs within an aphid. So an aphid gives live birth, but the aphid that is just about to be born is actually pregnant. So as soon as one aphid gets born, it reaches subadult. The next one that is inside that subadult one is also pregnant. So you can see how fast they actually rapidly multiply over time. So getting like a good integrated pest management system of getting these host plants and, you know, growing them around the area in which you're trying to keep all of these, you know, these pest plants kind of, or these pest insects at bay, is always a good thing. You know, it's there's also other like more holistic treatments like spraying water and things of that nature. But I always thought that was pretty interesting. All right, let me see here. Got some other stuff going on. In your opinion, is there any particular plants of the ones you've been mentioning that could help bring back some of those species to my little lot? There is goldenrod and bee balm, and some of those you have mentioned a lot. So, butterflies. Let's start with frogs and toads. Frogs and toads, you need specific types of habitat. Typically, frogs you're going to see more around like wet, marshier environments. If you have the breeding habitat, you'll have the frogs that stay there year round. So, if you're wanting to create, a good habitat for frogs, you're going to need to set up some sort of breeding habitat, and then they'll actually stay around. You know, even a place for like vernal pools. You know, you can set up like a couple black totes out in the yard. You know, granted, you might have mosquitoes, so that means you might have to go buy like a little Comet or something at Petco to eat the mosquitoes throughout the summer. But you can get some like native pond plants that will do quite well throughout the winter. But you'll have that vernal pool there, or I guess at that point it would be a pond for the frogs. For toads, it's the same thing. You got to have the food base there for the toads, so worms, things of that nature. The only thing I can really suggest with those two animals, like hostas, you know, granted it's not native, but they have a tendency of hanging out because it stays cooler there throughout the day. Another big, you know, a big predator to frogs and toads are raccoons and possums, cats. You know, those carnivorous animals. You know, they eat a lot of things, and if you have a high percentage of predators compared to prey, then you're definitely going to have a kind of an out of balance as to what you really see. Butterflies, it's not something you can always change overnight, so you really gotta start planting the species, you know, figure out what ones you want to have back in your yard. So if it's going to be swallowtails, you're going to want to grow a lot of things in the carrot family, dill, dill's one of them that you'll want because the tiger swallowtail larva will feed off that. You know, if you're wanting to see an abundance of if you're wanting to see an abundance of, you know, pollinators in your yard, it makes absolutely no sense in a pollinator garden to only produce flowers for nectar. You want to have those host plants. You know, that's what kind of keeps the butterflies there. So, you know, my suggestion would be kind of look into the species that you want to have, that you want to have back in your yard, and start planning and planting for that entire life cycle of what are those butterflies like to eat, like for their main nectar source. So one good example is buttonbush. Buttonbush is like a semi-marginal aquatic bush that grows really well in wet locations. It produces a flower, which is super high in nectar that tiger swallowtails absolutely love. But buttonbush is also a host plant to tiger swallowtails. So as they're feeding, they will also breed and then lay eggs on the on the bush, and then the larva will grow up, eat the leaves, and then, you know, the whole cycle continues. So that's one really good bush to have. You know, granted, it is a shrub, so you have to kind of be careful where you plant it. You can't really plant it right up against the house, but it's one that does work out very well. As for honeybees, you know, honeybees they're a fantastic pollinator to the flowers they like. You know, when it comes down to it, honeybees aren't native. And, you know, I love honey. I put honey on a lot of stuff. You know, it's very good. But they're not native. Honeybees outcompete all of our native species for those spots to get the nectar from those flowers. They're actually really aggressive when they do it. You know, like we've seen bumblebees and like spats like that amongst bees. But honeybees will actually continue to badger and badger and badger and badger. So as for bringing back populations of honeybees, I mean, that's because they're not native. You know, really any honeybees that you're seeing they might be a wild hive that escaped, but most likely it's from a farmer or some beekeeper in the area, and those bees are just out looking for pollen. You know, most of the bees that pollinate for us are actually solitary bees, like the sweat bees. We actually had a really cool bee here for the first time that I'd never seen before, called like the white saddle bee. It looked like crazy. It was all black with like some white dots on the top. But those are the bees you're going to want to attract. A lot of those bees, you know, they actually like hide in old stems and things of that nature from the fall. So that kind of comes down to like your pollinator garden during the fall into winter. You know, what do? Don't cut everything down. Let it dry. Let it go. Let it just dry out. Let it go to seed. Let it stay standing. And what that does is it provides that habitat for the solitary bees to nest in the stalks, nest in the leaf litter down below. Another thing is fireflies. If you like fireflies, if you love seeing fireflies, stop raking your leaves. Stop cleaning up your yard debris. You know, you can have a naturalized looking garden that, you know, doesn't look weedy. You know, granted, the first couple years as it's growing in, it may kind of look a little chaotic, but explain to your neighbors, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve. A sign always helps, you know, pollinator garden. So, you know, if you can attract the solitary bees, you're probably going to get honeybees, but just remember, if your overall goal is attracting honeybees, just make sure you plant more flowers, because you want to be catering to those solitary bees. You know, there's a specific bee that pollinates a specific willow tree. Like, that's the only bee that does it. You know, so our native bees are a little more, at least, you know, in my opinion, protecting. Now, if I ever become a beekeeper, I'm gonna be like, well, I really want to protect my honeybee hive, because, you know, that's honey for me and stuff like that. But an overall arching goal is to, you know, if you plant it, they will come. So start with your butterflies, figure out what plants you want to attract those species of butterflies, and everything else will kind of fall into line. So Franny says, what about Rose of Sharon? Notice they attract pollinators like crazy, but I'm not sure if they actually provide anything worthwhile, or they just draw the pollinators from other plants. So Rose of Sharon, Rose of Sharon's a tough one, because they're not really native, because so Rose of Sharon is related to the rose mallow, which is native. But it is like a wolf and a pug. It is so far apart that, you know, it's not really saying that, oh yeah, the Rose of Sharon is like slightly native, so we should kind of protect it. There's not really any insects that, you know, it's not a host plant to any insects, or you know, butterflies, moths, things of that nature. Japanese beetles absolutely love it. You find ladybugs all over it because aphids absolutely love Rose of Sharon. But when it comes down to actual versatility, it's not that versatile. It produces beautiful rose, hibiscus looking blooms, but you can get the same effect out of rose mallow. And rose mallow is native. It's very easy to grow. It's super prolific, and it's one that you can sit down, enjoy, but also sit down and watch the pollinators enjoy, because you have those pollinators laying eggs on it. Their caterpillars are eating it. So it's a win-win situation. But rose mallow is one that I would suggest if you're, looking to replace Rose of Sharon with something else. It doesn't come in blues or whites or anything, but it comes in a beautiful red color that, again, is native and beneficial to pollinators. So, yes, some of your sweat bees are actually like a lot stronger pollinators than some of your butterflies and honeybees. It's because they're a lot smaller. They can get into a wider range of flowers. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to read the question. So do sweat bees, carpenter bees, bumblebees also pollinate? Sweat bees, bumblebees, two phenomenal pollinators. Like, if you actually have a good, solid population of true bumblebees, then everything is getting pollinated because they're not picky. Honeybees are actually very, very picky. So there's been a lot of tests in permaculture gardens where people get honeybee hives. And they're like, I'm going to get honeybee hives. They're going to stay on my property. It's going to be a bee paradise where they just pollinate all my flowers. Well, what they do is they set up all these hives and they watch their bees. And their bees are flying off 5-10 miles off onto someone else's property, pollinating what they have out there, because whatever is out there is what they want. So honeybees are very unpredictable. The bees that you're going to want to focus on, your sweat bees, your bumblebees, your carpenter bees. Carpenter bees, not so much. They do pollinate, but they're not really big pollinators. The bumblebees are really what you want, really what you're focusing in on. But yeah, those are your bees you want to focus in on. So I can, so I made a list here. Let me check to see. All right. I made a list here of things, of just a rough idea of a plant list as to what you can do to plant for spring ephemeral that come out super early in the spring that are native, and then plants that literally bloom until the day they get snowed on and they start dying. And that's your full aspect of continuing to just be a pollinator haven. And, a few of the spring ones are going to be trees, just because a lot of your trees are some of the first to wake up, but they have just gorgeous blooms. So you really, I didn't see a problem. I should say they're more shrubs than trees. A couple of them, there's dogwoods and redwoods. Both of those are beautiful, beautiful trees. Red buds. Red buds produce those gorgeous kind of purpley clusters. The flowers of red bud are actually edible too. You can eat those. They make a red bud jelly out of them. That's a host to several different pollinator species. Same thing with dogwood. Witch hazel. It's an early spring bloomer. Witch hazel's kind of good in those shadier environments, but the nice thing about witch hazel is it's used as an astringent. So as you're trimming it up in that early spring before bud break or late winter, and you save the trimmings, you can actually boil those down and you can actually make your own face astringent or hand astringent or whatever you want to use it for. Columbine is a really good one. We have a beautiful eastern red columbine, Aqualia canadensis. It's a beautiful kind of bright red and yellow flower. Doesn't get very tall, but the nice thing is it can grow a little bit better in that more rocky environment, so you don't have like a super rich humus soil, so it gives you a little more options. Wild ginger is another one. Wild ginger is pretty neat. It's a more shade loving plant, but the roots are also edible, and yes, it does taste like ginger. That's your early spring into spring. There's obviously you can get into like hydrangeas and azaleas and native rhododendrons. The list for spring blooming is quite large because there's an absolute pile of them. But as you go into fruit trees, obviously, like, you can do different types of fruit trees, like your cherries, your apples, any of those types. Granted, they're not native, but different caterpillars will, from moth and butterfly species, will lay eggs on them. So you will see some of the leaves getting eaten, but you kind of get that opportunity to be like, hey, you know, like, some of the leaves are getting eaten for the host as a host plant, but I'm still going to reap the benefit of having apples in the fall, or, you know, peaches in the summer. Moving into summer, you're going to start getting your bee balm, your coreopsis, your echinacea, your berry bushes. You know, the list starts kind of expanding as to like what you can plant. That is not only, you know, beneficial for pollinators, but it's also beneficial for you and I. Bee balm you can make a tea out of. Echinacea, obviously, the roots can be used for like coughs and things of that nature. One really cool tree that we have is the chestnut, or the chinkapin. That is one of the only summer flowering trees. So if you're looking for a tree that flowers in like about another 2 or 3 weeks, that's when you're gonna start seeing American chestnuts, chinkapins and stuff start to flower. So that's a really cool summer tree that you can have. That is a huge you know, host plant to a wide array of moths and butterflies, and also kind of bring back a lost tree that, you know, just hasn't really, that unfortunately was the backbone of America. Got a terrible fungal disease that spread across literally the entire United States and just wiped out the chestnut. They used to be they literally, like, America was built on the chestnut tree. There were so many chestnuts. Plus, they're edible, so you can eat the chestnuts. You know, the old song, chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Yep, ain't no chestnut roasting anymore because we killed them all. But you can plant them and get some back. So, summer going into fall, your options kind of dwindle as to what you are going to have for plants. But it does kind of open up some neat opportunities. So Pennistamen is one. They call it hairy beard tongue is a variety, but beard tongue is the variety of plant. Another one is obviously milkweed. You're going to start seeing that milkweed flower now, and it can actually flower all the way into the fall. Sneezeweed. Really cool thing about sneezeweed, it is an absolutely awful common name, but sneezeweed was originally going to be made as snuff. They would dry it out, but the problem with it is there's a couple chemicals in sneezeweed that literally, like, make you sneeze as soon as you inhale it. So what they did was they would make this sneeze weed into a snuff. People would use it, and people would start sneezing uncontrollably. It's also called weed because it grows like a weed. Like once it starts kind of growing in an area, it establishes relatively quickly. Quickly being like a few years, but you get a nice grouping of it. So sneeze weed is an absolutely terrible common name, especially when you're trying to sell it to someone, because you're like, why would I ever want to have a plant in my yard called sneezeweed? So you may see it also available for sale as Helen's Daisy, and that's just a native plant. Same thing with asters. Both of those will literally bloom until the day that they start getting snow on them. So those are some fantastic late season pollen options for pollinators, especially monarchs on their way back. Those are great options for stops for them, so you can grow large clusters. Another one is going to be stonecrop. We do have a couple native species of stonecrop in the United States. They do have a tendency of blooming in the fall. One fantastic one is called Autumn Joy. Now, Autumn Joy is a variety. It is not a cultivar. So it's one that, you know, granted it's not a pure species, but you know, a lot of us aren't like super purists when it comes to just trying to, you know, create a better environment for pollinators. But Autumn Joy sedum is going to be another fantastic nectar producer in late fall going into winter. Plus, once all the foliage dies, it makes a pretty cool dried arrangement, so you get another little bonus off of that. But those are just kind of like a few examples from early spring all the way going into winter that you can use to kind of create a well-rounded pollinator garden to attract the pollinators that you're hoping to attract. I'd say we are getting pretty close to about 8 o'clock. If anyone else has any other questions, by all means, this last little segment here, you know, ask away. You know, I want to hear how your week's been going. I want to hear like what plant are you struggling to grow this week. You know, what y'all got? Would I ever do a class on how to use natives? Megan, I would love to do a class on how to use natives and like how to properly plant them. My biggest problem right now is time. If anyone wants to be an intern, you're more than welcome to come down. Come here. So all this is an absolute terrible video. All that right there, those are all zinnias that I have to get potted up because zinnias are an annual, but they are a fantastic pollinator plant. So granted, they're an annual, but they produce an absolute pile of nectar. They're a great bat signal plant to attract the pollinators to your yard. So we are potting up 8-inch pots with 8 zinnias in it, and then having those available for the latter half of the summer going into fall to give some of those pollinators more of an option for nectar. So I would love to do, there's a lot of things I would love to do. I would love to do more educational classes and hold them, you know, because that's where it's really going to start. It does make me feel good that like if I sell a couple pollinator plants to someone and they're planting them across town, and then a couple other people plant them here and plant them here, like we as a collective are slowly contributing to the, I guess, beautification in some people's eyes of this area. You know, are we ever going to actually get rid of all the Bradbury pears or, you know, the boxwoods that smell like cat pee? No, unfortunately we're not. But, you know, we can slowly continue to kind of move forward and do all that stuff. But unfortunately right now it just has to do with time, and like once we're able to kind of free up a lot of stuff, there's so much that I want to do, just not able to get there yet. Also, I have a fair portion of my yard that is mostly shade, maybe gets 1 to 3 hours of sun a day. Are there any good pollinator friendly plants that would thrive there? Buttonbush would be fantastic for it. It'll tolerate some shade, and the nice thing is it's a shrub, so it's a host plant and a flowering plant. We have Jacob's Ladder. Wild Ginger is another one that produces very well there. Those species would grow well in that low shaded area, and they would also attract and keep pollinators. So those are just 3 options. There's a couple other spring ephemerals, but those 3 are pretty solid for kind of creating a ground cover. Flowers going through the season, and also host opportunities. Jennifer says, I have a fishbone cactus that isn't growing. What kind of soil mixture should I put it in to help? So the problem about calling a fishbone cactus a cactus is a lot of people hear the word cactus and they think dry environment. A fishbone cactus is actually part of a tropical family of cactus and succulents. So a standard tropical mix would be perfectly fine for it. Also, it doesn't hurt to try to give it a little extra humidity if you have that option. Keep it under 8 hours of full sun a day, and you should be able to have a little bit better of an opportunity with success. They're kind of smushed up against each other. Should I worry about that and move the yarrow, or just let it be? So the coreopsis will, both plants will end up spreading. You know, you can always, the nice thing about yarrow is it's super hardy. So like if you're really if you're seeing the visual effects of like longer leaves, I should say the visual indicators of like longer leaves, you know, some lightening of the foliage, and it's not really getting as much of its desired conditions because the coreopsis is, you know, hindering that, I would say go ahead and move it. Spread it out, push it out of the way a little bit, and it should do all right. But yarrow is very hardy, so you know, that's it's kind of like, if it's the aesthetic that you're looking at right now and saying, you know, like, I know I have yarrow under here, but the coreopsis is completely covering it up, then go ahead and move it. You know, if you're only like super bothered about it because you're only seeing it like every now and then, and it's like kind of on your priority list, but there's like a million other things to do on that list, I wouldn't stress too much about it. If you are going to move it, because we're getting all this rain, try to do it early morning or in the evening, and it should be perfectly fine. I hope that helps. Woo, we got 7 people in here. That's the most we've ever had. Yeah! Woo. You're more than welcome, Michelle. Well, it is 8 o'clock. Does anyone have any other questions before I bug out? Well, I appreciate it. We enjoy doing the lives. We enjoy answering questions from everyone. Again, if anyone ever has any questions and we're not doing our Terra Talk, you're more than welcome to shoot it to our Facebook page. We really appreciate everyone coming in. Thank you again for the stars, Cindy. It means a lot to us. It kind of helps. You know, I don't want to say it's a motivating factor in creating these videos, because that's certainly not the case. I create them so people can learn and they can be educated, and you know, kind of spread that around to How can I kill off tiger lilies that have taken over my yard? Are you talking about the daylilies? If you're talking about the daylilies, the best way to get rid of them is dig them up. You'll have to dig them up and get that rhizome out of the ground. And once you do that, you should be all right. One trick with them, because they are invasive, is when you dig them up, just leave them out to dry, and that'll be your best. That'll be your best thing. Is just to sit them out there and let them dry. Let them dry all the way out. I will say one really cool thing about the daylilies, those old-fashioned daylilies. You can actually make candied daylily tubers, and it tastes really well. But yeah, just throwing it out there. If you dig them up, you unfortunately have to dig them up manually. That's really going to be the only effective way to get rid of them. Leave them out there to dry, fully dry, die, and don't just like throw them out into the yard, because all you're doing is just transplanting. But yeah, just if you throw them out in an area that's always going to get an absolute pile of sun, and just pay attention. But yeah, daylilies are pretty invasive. Nothing wrong with being compassionate. Oh yeah. Well, we hopefully we'll be able to have some like in classes and stuff, and maybe we'll, unfortunately, maybe if we have time in the winter, we can try to do something then. But we've got a lot of cool things coming down the. We got a lot of cool things in the works. Hopefully, as time goes on, we have a larger area to be able to kind of cater and have people come and do some hands-on learning. But that's all in the future. But for now, it's past 8 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you again for the stars. It means a lot to us. Hope you learned something. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us a message. We can either save it for next week, or we'll answer it right then and there. Thanks for tuning in. Gotta go, gotta grow.